talking about the flight to Japan. So I did a video, the last video was talking about the lead up to the flight, which basically meant, the history, how I got to Japan and everything, and then, everything that happened that I was able to go finally in 2019, and then, the plans were to go right back in 2020, which obviously didn't happen, and then, of course, I was able to go in 2023, and you know why it took that long and all the other stuff. And now I'll be talking about the flight. So I did do a video back when I bought the tickets, talking about the itinerary that was chosen and why it was chosen, and all that good stuff. So that's kind of going to be covered in here as well, and I'll talk about what happened on the flight. So the flight that I chose was an ANA operated flight, tickets purchased through United, code shared basically, and it was done for a specific reason. So with the pandemic having happened, everything that is a service is basically much worse than it was before, and probably more expensive. You get less of the thing, and the thing is worse, and you pay more. And companies used the pandemic to normalize that kind of stuff. And, from everything that I'd ever seen, air travel was one of the biggest things that got worse since the pandemic. Even though the airlines were basically bailed out when they had to ground planes, and people flying came back really, really, really hard once the pandemic was over. So they don't seem to be suffering, but just like the reason that I believed when I read this stuff was because everything that I dealt with was the same way. Anything that was a service was worse than it was pre-pandemic. And that service was more expensive, and like I said, it was worse. And you also had worse people doing it as well, which could be explained. And anything like that kind of thing happened from anything, food to flying, it doesn't matter, because a lot of places, with service actually getting worse, like with worse people, like, yes, that's a thing, it is worse people doing these jobs. It could be because these people were not the ones doing these jobs before the pandemic, and they might have had different jobs that they liked better, and then they end up having to do this kind of stuff, so they're not going to put their full effort into it. Like, and I couldn't blame somebody if, I had foresight to get a job that's not going to be affected by that kind of thing, because there was something that I had to do as far as my work, and doing what I enthuse about, unfortunately, is not one of those things, but doing what is smart is one of those things. I don't have to enthuse about my job, but my job allows me to enthuse about the things I want to do and actually take part in them. It's like, one of my things is cars, right? If, and a lot of people I know, they'll have a car job, or they want a job or something related to cars, but it doesn't maximize what they make. It's like, oh, you love cars, you work at a Toyota dealership, but you can't afford one of the new Supras or something. Like, no, that doesn't work for me. But anyway, listen, service got worse. And, as far as airlines, because I hadn't flown yet, I'd only read that that's how it was. But because in practice, anything that I dealt with myself was also the same way, which meant that, with the airlines, it had to be a Japanese airline because the service was going to be better. And even with those, I still heard that the food wasn't as good. But that didn't matter as much to me, simply because, Japanese food isn't that good to me anyway. And the stuff that you would get on a plane, at least the menus that I saw, because you can see what the menus are going to be or whatever. And, you have two different choices. You have your A and your B choice or whatever. And those, neither choice is going to be, appetizing or even really desirable for me, because none of the choices are going to be like an American choice. Which, so when I went using Delta back in 2019, that's how the choices were. It was a Western choice or a Japanese choice. And, the food looked pretty good regardless, and, it was decent. But then, of course, I looked up the videos on things before I made this booking anyway, to see, because pretty much anywhere that you're going to fly, any airline that you're going to fly on, you can probably see a video on YouTube where somebody's reviewing that schedule. So, I did that, and, food looked pretty gross. But again, as Japanese food, I wasn't too concerned about it, because, I'm probably not going to eat everything that I get. But overall service, because Japan is Japan, you're going to still get the impeccable service. You're not going to have people letting their basically their saltiness at how things worked out during the pandemic. They're not going to let that show in their quality of work, because it's Japan. And again, like I said, I understand if somebody did that. They had some kind of nice cushy job or something, and then they have to work at a food place and they're not happy about it. And maybe some people, with the pandemic, with flying and stuff, or being like a flight attendant, maybe they had to. Well, they couldn't work for a pretty good chunk of time. Maybe they got laid off before, and now they're coming back. Maybe even with a different airline. But they probably had to restart and everything, so it sucked. So yeah, I get it. But yeah, had to choose Japanese. And then between ANA and JAL, the thing about those airlines is it still mattered, the rules still mattered for the US-based carrier that I was going to book with, because like I said, I did a code share. So that means I had to book with United or American. And of course, if you're doing a code share, you go by the original rules, as far as baggage allowances. You go by the rules of that original airline that you booked with, which meant that I would be following either United or American's baggage rules. And United had 2 check bags. American had 1. And the fact that, that's going to save a couple $100. If I used, because I was going to need, more than one. So I took one up there. I took one check bag up there, one suitcase. But I had a suitcase inside that suitcase because I knew I was going to buy stuff and I needed to bring it back, obviously. And I knew on the way back that meant I was going to have 2 check bags. And without a check bag allowance, without that, on the way back, that would have been $400, I believe. So it would have been $200 per leg of that flight, if I'm recalling correctly. And even if it's not per leg, that's still $200 to get that stuff back. Now, that's a lot of money just for that. But it really didn't matter because United had that as an allowance. So obviously that was the difference in booking between the two. So United/ANA. And of course you can't book directly from my home airport, which is CVG. You can't book directly there to Haneda, Japan, period. So you will have to do a domestic flight, and that will be your United operated leg or whatever have you. Now, my itinerary to go to Japan was from CBG to EWR, which is Newark. And then I had to transfer to JFK from Newark. And then JFK to Haneda. And that's because in the New York area, United themselves only fly out of EWR. They don't fly to JFK. So therefore, they will not arrive at JFK. And ANA does not fly out of EWR. So that means if you do that kind of booking, you have to transfer. Now, going from CVG to EWR is actually going backwards in relation to Japan, because you're flying east and then you're flying west, and then there's a whole transfer. So the original plan, the original times for everything was I was to leave CVG at 8:30 p.m. arrive at EWR at about 10:30-ish, and I would have to transfer to JFK and be able to leave there at 2. That's when that flight was scheduled to leave, 2 a.m. And of course, being an international flight, you gotta be there at least 2 hours early to get through everything for that leg of the flight. So that is ultra tight. That is more than tight. And I asked about it after I booked the ticket. Is this even possible to make? And everybody's like, yeah, I mean, if you use Uber or something like that, which, given the time of day and it being on the weekend, that could, be $200, because the base price to transfer from EWR to JFK, base price is about $100 on Uber to do that. And there could be surge pricing as well, which could have made it about twice as much. So, I had the great idea to do a standby flight, leave a little earlier so I wouldn't have to deal with that. Well, leave a lot earlier. So my plan was to leave at 6 in the morning instead of 8:30 at night. And, I would leave at 6 in the morning. I would arrive at EWR at 8. I could do the transfer at my leisure instead of, having to be super mindful of time if something happened. Because, even if I were able to make that transfer manually, by train or the Lear or whatever, it would be very tight. If I missed one thing, that whole thing is falling apart. So I didn't want to be that tight anyway. to say, what are you waiting on? Made me wait out here forever, buddy. So anyway, the transfer, as I taken a standby flight like 14 hours earlier, was the goal, because I would have arrived at EWR by 8 and done the transfer, and I could have rented a car, because I would have transferred to JFK. I would have just rented a car from JFK. I would have, driven around New York, grabbed some New York pizza from like a little rando place or whatever, because I was actually asking about that, like, hey, what is a good pizza place in New York so I can get some NYC pizzas and authentic. So, I would do that. That'd be one of the things I do, just drive around, see stuff and whatnot. It'd be a good time. Then I could, bring the car back, take my flight. That's how it was all planned to work out. Now, how it worked out, not quite so. So, I tried to get to the airport for that early flight, for that 6 o'clock. Didn't make it quite in time, just a couple minutes late, which is fine. Now, think about the distance between here and the airport. We're talking like less than 30 minutes to the airport, and with me driving, at a speed that I would normally drive at, a lot less than that. So anyway, I didn't make it. That's fine. Now I gotta wait on the next flight, because that flight, the CBG to EWR, seems to be every 2 hours. So that's fine. I'll wait until the next one. The next one comes up, and I'm not on the list. I should be on the list, because once that first flight was missed, I'm like, well, I'll be on the standby list for the next one. And see, here's the thing. I think they just assumed that because it was early in the morning, there's going to be room, so they don't need to actually put me on the list. But that was incorrect, because without being put on the list, my bags, like my checked luggage, which was checked right before that 6 o'clock flight, is not going to go to the fucking plane if there's nothing about me going on that flight. So therefore it did not happen. Like, because they're like, yeah, we'll get you on the next one. It'll be early, so it shouldn't be a problem. But not officially putting me on the list meant that my shit didn't get on there. And the reason I find this out is because that we're getting close to that flight taking off, and I don't see my name on the list. I'm like, what's going on? I'm not on the list. And like, I literally just talked to you after that 6 o'clock flight. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, there's space, but your bag wouldn't go. Like, I'm not going, leaving, getting there, and then having to wait 2 hours for my bag is not ideal. Like, it's a whole waste of time. As, these first 2 hours from 6 to 8, that's fine, because I didn't get there in time. But now we got 8 to 10 to wait, which is not fine, because it was due to their negligence. And then that comes around and the same thing happens. Again, somehow my bag isn't gonna go. Like, I'm not actually on the list, and my bag is not going to go. At best, it can go on the next flight, which means I'm still gonna be waiting for 2 more hours for my things, because if I leave the airport, I'm gonna have to get back there, right? So even, at best, because I have to, if I'm gonna rent a car, I have to rent a car at JFK, because typically at an airport, you have to bring the car back to the airport. You can't return it to another location of the same place. Like I can't return an Enterprise car that I got from the airport to a location in town, which that actually ends up playing a role in me deciding to actually take this trip, because that 10 o'clock flight's about to come, or about to leave, and again, I'm not, like, my stuff's not going to be on it, so I leave the airport. I'm like, man, this is fucking completely stupid. How could they do this twice? And you want to talk about, the lack of service, or services being worse and shit, like, that's definitely, it had to be. I mean, that was some very, very incompetent actions that were taken. And, the thing is, I mean, these gate agents, they didn't even look like people that would normally even do that shit. It was just like pandemic's over, need a job, just like I was saying before. So, anyway, I left the airport. Like, I got my shit, I got my bag. I'm like, just, you've had my bags for like 4 hours and not putting it, or at this point, 4 hours, and for some reason my shit's not going on any plane. Just give me my bags back. I'm leaving. And then I had to rent a car, and because it's at the airport, it's fucking twice as much to rent the car as it is to rent one in town or whatever. So I go home and I actually I grab some Chipotle on the way back. Now I'm flying home because I'm pissed, so driving fast is what I do. And I grabbed this first Chipotle I had since the pandemic, actually. And the reason for that is Chipotle went online orders only during the pandemic, and I refused to order Chipotle. Definitely, I refused to order that shit online, because even when, before the pandemic, when I would go there, I was pretty regularly a Chipotle customer. And the online orders, like, they skimp them. They're always late as fuck. Like, no reason for me to do it. And, they skimp them because nobody's watching them make the food. And sometimes, even with you being there in person, they'll still skimp. But definitely, online orders, you were getting skimped. And, you can go to the Chipotle subreddit, and people will talk about that shit as well. But anyway, the net result was that I did not go to Chipotle for fucking 4 years. And I still haven't been since that date either. But I was angry enough, and I wanted some food and shit, because, this was fucking close to 11 o'clock by the time this is happening, because I missed the 10 o'clock, and then I had to go to the car rental area and all this stuff, and then, make this drive. The drive itself wasn't that long, but it's probably about 11 o'clock, so I'm hungry as shit, because by this point, I should have, I've saved room for a fucking New York pizza, and since most places open for lunch at 10:30 to 11 o'clock, this is around the time that I should have been expecting to eat, some New York pizza in New York. So, I get this Chipotle, and I'm like, man, I don't know about taking this trip, because if it's starting like this, man, and I'm going to be there for a month, how the fuck bad can it go? How fucking bad can it go? So I go home, I spent this $100 to get this car and drive it like fucking, 15 20 minutes home. And so I go home, I take a nap because, you know, I'm underslept anyway because of the upcoming trip. I'm underslept. So I just go take a nap. And I could have been at home all that time, which, like I said, it's not that far away, and in much more comfort than sitting there fully dressed at an airport. So, you know, went home, napped, and the only reason that I actually decided to go on a trip is because I had to go back to the airport anyway to return the car, because that's when I found that I couldn't just take the car to an Enterprise that was in the city here. But that's what I would have done. I would have just taken it to the Enterprise and just said, fuck it, I don't need the trip. But since I had to take it back, I went up there and got on the flight, like one flight before my actual flight, so 6:30 or 6 p.m. or whatever, instead of the 8:30. And, you know, I knew it would be necessary to at least go one flight early, based on having to do that transfer. And, you know, that's pretty much how it was. So, you know, I finally take this flight. I get out of there at 10, or at 6 on the, it was an Embraer E175 from CBG to EWR. And then, you know, I do the transfers. So various different steps of train and subway or whatever across, you know, Jersey and New York to the ANA terminal. And I don't even remember what time it was when I got there, but it took fucking hours to get through their line. This wasn't even security. This was just their line in Terminal 5. So, and this was, I think everybody was going on this same flight that was leaving at 2 a.m. So, you know, got there in plenty of time, but not enough time to go do anything in New York. I'm like, fuck. I made it here. I can't get a pizza. I mean, it was too late. It's probably too late to get a pizza. Only places that'd be open at that time would be like those by the slice places and shit. And I've never had a by the slice pizza that was actually fucking good. I don't care who makes it, because it's gonna be sitting out. It's gonna be fucking kind of dry and gross. So yeah, no. But anyway, there wasn't enough time. You know, I had to just get right to the airport. And I think they were training brand new people at the counter, at the ANA counter, from what I could tell and from what I heard. And this was a horrible time to do that. But yeah, I mean, it took hours to get through the line. Security wasn't even anything like that. Like after the line. So we make it through there, and it's about 1 o'clock. And mind you, we've got, you know, I got there a lot earlier than I would have gotten there on my original ticket. So if I left at that 8:35 or whatever, and then I arrived, you know, after doing the transfer, and it took that long to get through that line, I wouldn't have made that flight. I definitely wouldn't have made that flight. So I made the right call in doing a standby flight. I just wanted to do a much, much, much earlier standby flight. So we got done at about, I think it was about like 1 o'clock, which seems like it was a lot of time. But like I said, that hour, you know, at the gate, it ended up actually being quite a bit more than that. But that time at the gate, that extra time was only due to me leaving 2 hours early, because had I not left 2 hours early, I would have been fucking at least 1 hour late for that flight. doesn't take off, the main reason that I was more concerned about that is because that flight doesn't take off like every couple of hours. It's not every 2 hours like the previous flight or like the other leg. So if I fucking miss that, I'm gonna be in Japan, or I'm gonna be at in New York for a very, very, very long time. A lot longer than I fucking had to wait around CVG, and that's not a good look. And that would definitely cause me to cancel. I'd just be like, look, I'll just buy a fucking flight back to CVG and just go home. Fuck this. So anyway, we're done at about 1. We're at the gate at 1. Plane's supposed to leave at 2. And then actually tell us that the plane needs to refuel. So it's gonna be later than that. A lot later. I don't think that plane left until like 3 something. Or it didn't even board until 3 something. So yep, that's how that worked out. And then that flight was, it was unremarkable. There was just a lot of turbulence going about an hour away from Japan. Extreme turbulence. That 777-300 ER was getting pushed around pretty decently, but there were no real reactions by any passengers. Now, of course, when the crew were coming down aisles and stuff, they did the whole like kneeling thing because of the turbulence and stuff like that. So you see them get down. I'm like, man, that looks pretty serious to me. The fact that they're getting down like that. But I mean, it was pretty serious turbulence though. It was enough to where if you weren't wearing seatbelts, you'd probably have some problems. And that's another thing about the flight, like booking and going through the Japanese airlines. Now, if you're going to Japan, it might be a thing to where it really doesn't matter what airline you're using, because I went on that Delta flight back in 2019. There were like 3 not Japanese people with me being one of them, or not Asian people. So of course not everybody going to Japan is Japanese as well, even if they're Asian. So there were 3 non-Asian people, and for the most part, I'm gonna assume they were mostly Japanese either way. And discipline and stuff like that is a much bigger thing than it is here. And that's one of the reasons I'm like, with all these videos of people fucking acting stupid, especially on airplanes and in the airport, another reason I want to go with Japanese, just to make sure. And with this flight, people were not freaking out over that turbulence, which there was turbulence on the way back, which I'll talk about. And the reaction to that was a lot different. And also, the whole thing about people wearing seatbelts and stuff. If that flight had been full of Americans, it is possible that people would not have had seatbelts. So anyway, that flight was fine. It landed, and I got to enjoy Japan. And even though we came in the weather and it was raining when when we landed, by the time I got out of the airport, it was dry. to O'Hare, and then O'Hare to CBG. Now, there was nothing stand out about the first leg. Didn't even really run into turbulence, or if there was, I slipped through it as well. So, nothing to comment on that flight. However, on the way back, or from CBG, or from ORD, well, let's see what happened there. So, we getting through security on that flight was fucking a pain in the ass. It took forever to get through security coming back from Haneda through O'Hare. So because of that, I missed the connecting flight to get home. And when that happened, I had the bright idea to go rent a car from the airport. Of course, twice as expensive again as it would be from within the city. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna get a Chicago pizza. I didn't get a New York pizza when I was there, so I'm gonna rent a car, get a Chicago pizza. And I go. There's a couple places right by the airport that you can go. So I went to, was it Giordano's or something like that? So I went there, grabbed the pizza, came back. Did not make it in time to go through security onto this flight. So this is on me. Just like missing the 6 o'clock flight was on me, but the 8 and 10 o'clock on the way up was definitely them. So anyway, I missed that first connecting flight. Or I missed this would be the second flight actually, because the first one was missed by, going through security and that connection just being too tight anyway. The second one was missed because it took me too long to get back. I went to go eat the pizza, went to go dine in, and blah, blah, blah. It was good food, but I missed the flight. So then, I considered, after that, I'm like, will they let me get the car again? Because I was like, I didn't even put gas in the car, and the car was still above E. Like that's how little I use the car. The car costs $100 to rent, and like I said, by the time I brought it back, I didn't even fill the gas up, and there was, it was, like I said, it was still above E. And unfortunately, they can't give me the thing. They can't give it to me. So it'll have to be a new rental, $200 more. I'm like, shit, I'm already $200 in the rentals on this trip. I'm like, it didn't cost anywhere near that to have a rental car the whole time in Japan. Well, I mean, it costs more than that, but like per day, it was nowhere near that. So anyway, I get back. Finally, I get to the airport. Get back to the airport. I missed this flight, so I gotta wait another time, and then I'm finally on my flight, my final leg, and it's like less than an hour. It's like 50 minutes or something like that. And this is on a 737 MAX 9, which is crazy because the plane was like a couple weeks old or something like that when I flew on it. Yeah, the plane was like brand new, and it was grounded recently, with that stuff going on with the MAX 9 door plug going on from Alaska Airlines. So all Boeing 737 MAX 9s were grounded, including the one I was on. And like I believe my seat would have been like pretty fucking close to that, which is kind of crazy, to the door plug. So anyway, this flight was a very turbulent flight as well, and it was going to be turbulence throughout the whole thing. You know, that's what they announced during the taxiing. They're like, well, we are expecting turbulence, you know, the whole way there, and we may actually not do the food service or the snack service. It was only going to be snacks because it was like a 50-minute flight. So yeah, that thing ended up just being full on turbulence the whole time, just as they predicted. But the difference in reaction compared to being out there by Japan, you know, everybody was doing, you know, that stuff that people do in movies when everything was like, like people were doing that. Like, I actually heard that shit. And you know, I was explaining to my seatmate, because there was a bunch of people, a bunch of guys and girls dressed in UC stuff. So some school trip they were on, or something sports. I mean, it was like all athletic wear, but I don't know what kind of co-ed thing there is for everybody to be suited up in athletic wear together. But either way, you know, I mean, I don't know what it was they were doing, but it was a bunch of people from there. One of my people was one of those students and whatnot, and he was getting freaked out. I mean, everybody was getting freaked out. Like, I wasn't, because it was still a bit milder. At least it seemed like it was a bit milder than stuff out there in Japan. But it was still, like I said, I mean, it was still definitely like crazy, because it was just there the whole time. No, you know, like no relenting. It was there the whole time, and you know, you could tell that we were fucking speeding through this shit too. Like, we were definitely speeding. We were going really fucking fast. And you know, but I had to explain to the guy what was going on, because you know, he started like looking out the door, or started looking out the not the door. Well, it probably was the door plug, but he starts looking out the window, because I'm in the window seat. He's, you know, getting antsy. I mean, everybody, like I said, was pretty antsy. But you know, I'm explaining, like, man, what's going on, because you know, I can see what the flaps are doing and so on and so forth. So I'm trying to be a little educational, which, you know, helps them out to realize. And then, you know, other stuff, you know, like these, if this stuff is bad enough, you know, that the plane would even potentially have issues, they are gonna go around the storm. If they're going through the storm, they know the plane can make it. Like, there's, you know, they also want to get home, right? So that's how it works. That's the gist of, you know, what I told him. And then actually, like, when we landed, when we were in the airport, he actually thanked me for that. I was like, yeah, no problem. And, you know, it's actually kind of unfortunate for me to learn as much about it, because, you know, flying even 2019, the first flight I ever took, I'm like, I knew less about everything that time than I did this time. I actually felt better for it, because when you know a lot of stuff, when you know more about it, there's actually a lot of stuff that's unsettling about flying, because it seems like you're closer to being crashed than you are not, is what it seems like when you know stuff. And the only reason I even know things is because of, you know, the tube. When I was searching like the flights, like to learn, like, oh well, how is it, you know, how is a ANA flight to, you know, from GWR or from JFK to Haneda. Like, you know, when I'm looking up that stuff, then on the sidebar, you've got all this other stuff going on, right? You've got, you know, these other aviation-related things going on. So you're like, oh, well, YouTube is YouTube, so they picked my interest. Let's go have a look. And then, you know, you learn more about how stuff works. And it's just like, oh, man, if an ATC says like one digit wrong, or the fucking pilot hears one digit wrong and he repeats the wrong, like, one thing, it's like, oh, everybody's dead. And before you even take off, it's like, oh, that was 31 right. You said 31L. 31 right. 31L. What? Yeah, 30. Okay, yeah. 31. Okay. And then like a plane just lands on top of you and everybody's dead and shit like that. You know, I mean, that's extreme, but you know that happened. That kind of thing happens, or even a pilot themselves just decides they want to just, I'm getting a little, I just want to leave, man. I'm ready to leave. So then, you know, a Tenerife happens, and I think that's the most people that's ever died on a plane, or on planes. Is two fucking 747s, where a, you know, one's coming in and the other one's trying to take off, and he's not really, I don't think he's cleared to land, but he just wanted to take off because he was impatient. So they collide and everybody fucking dies and shit. And then, you know, I knew about the MAX 9 thing, the 737 MAX 9. I knew about that before the flight. So when I saw it was that kind of plane, I'm like, And then, of course, the flight was a couple months before the Alaska Airlines thing happened. And I'm like, oh, shit, of course. Because, you know, the 737 MAX had these problems back in 2018 and 2019 where the planes basically killed people. You know, it had this computer system, was the MCAS or something like that. I'm saying or something like that when I know that's what it's called. I don't know, it's just what you do. But, you know, it had that system, and basically it decided that, you know what, the ground looks like the air, so I'm going to fly there. And then, you know, pilots don't know how to fucking disengage it or whatever, so they're like, oh, we can't do anything. Why is the plane just flying right into the ground? And yeah, then Boeing's like, oh yeah, you know, it's their fault. And then they find out because company, it's the company's fault making the changes. Because as far as I know, they made the changes to the system, but they didn't document it because I guess people would have needed to be retrained on the new version of the plane, and to cut time and cost from people having to do that, or, you know, airlines having to retrain people for a completely new type of airplane, then you know, just do something but say you didn't do it. So I knew about that before even getting on the MAX 9, and then the MAX 9, you know, and I guess it's a good thing that I was able to, that we got off of that flight. Shit, when you think about it, because it was turbulence the whole time. It was only 50 minutes, but it was pretty good turbulence the whole time. And if the whole door plug thing, you know, who knows if they found that door did not have the bolts in it, because that door could definitely not have had the bolts in it. And being in a turbulent flight like that, you know, that thing could have lopped off there at any moment, and it would not course, this would be the case. So, yeah, literally people, they said that they just got back from Mexico. Because, you know, they were actually sunburned. Like, they had on shorts and, like, very loose, light clothing. And they had some sunburn going on them or some good tan. And they said they had just came back from Mexico. And I'm like, yeah, I was out there. I'm like, oh, man, dealing with this kind of weather. Because I actually started the conversation because I saw that they were dressed like that. I'm like, oh, yeah, I mean, but then, you know, what was funny is the lady, you know, when I said where I had come from and I was talking about the weather there, like, was pretty good as well, especially compared to what we're all now having to deal with, having come back. And then she, you know, on the way out, like when I'm leaving the conversation and all this other stuff, she goes, konnichiwa. I'm like, you cringe lady. But yeah, it was, and that was it. I actually had, so yeah, there was a thing. Now, on the way here, my bag actually left before I did. So these people at O'Hare actually did their job as far as having my bag to go on the flight. Now, it arrived there before I did because I had missed, you know, I missed that flight. But, you know, as it should have gone out on the next flight, it did. Now, what I did, though, is I had somebody go to CBG and pick my shit up because, you know, I mean, there's no security on your luggage, right? So I had somebody go to CBG, bring this Jeep. You know, bring my Jeep. I already had my keys and shit. So I'm like, take this Jeep that I'm driving now, go to CBG, put my luggage in the back, park the car, just tell me where it's at, and then I can just drive home when I get to the airport. So that's what happened. Because, you know, and, you know, even in Japan, I wouldn't trust my luggage at the airport because it's not all Japanese people at the airport. Now, anywhere that's within Japan, even if there's going to be some tourists, people are probably going to act more decent or pretend to be more decent, right? So, you know, generally losing something in Japan, you know, even like a phone or a wallet, can generally result in you getting it back. Now, like I said, at airport, anywhere, at least, you know, like the big ones. If I were doing like some kind of small town thing, which I wouldn't really do, but if I were, I'd probably feel a lot better there. But an airport is still international, and you have people that are not Japanese there, so I still wouldn't trust my shit there. But I definitely don't trust it here in the States or anywhere else, honestly. And there's places I trust even less than the States for theft and shit. But definitely not here. So that's why I had to have somebody come and, you know, get my shit and bring my vehicle, put my shit in it for me to drive. And I said it was cold and rainy on the way back, and I'm like, I didn't deal with shitty weather that whole month. And it was, like I said, it was supposed to have pretty much been the same thing here weather-wise, like fucking 70s throughout all October. And then, of course, when I get back, which is, you know, not a great thing. That's why it's called vacation, because it's better than what you're doing. Which, you know, I mean, there's probably some people who's like, daily shit. And then, I mean, those are like fucking 1%ers, where their daily shit is still as good as when they go on vacation, or that, you know, they don't feel as like, when the vacation's over, you're like, at least a long one like that. If I were going for a weekend, I wouldn't care, but I typically wouldn't go on a weekend vacation because I would have to drive. So I'm not gonna fly somewhere for a weekend. And I hate driving on the interstate just because it's so fucking boring when you don't have company. And, you know, when you're grown like this, having company on a trip is not a guarantee. Because even with a significant other, there's reasons why that's not going to be a thing. Like, I mean, I went to Japan. I mean, I've been there twice. Nobody's gone with me. You know, like significant other. Like there's, and you know, kid as well. I mean, there's no reason for them to go there. Because, I mean, you know, kid is not old enough to really experience what Japan is. Now, you know, I'm doing FaceTime calls or whatever, and you know, seeing all the buildings, you know, everything is all lit up and looks like a movie and shit over there, which, you know, that sounds interesting, but you know, what are you gonna get out of going there? Nothing. I want you to be able to, you know, be mature enough to be able to like learn some Japanese and know that you are in a different place and what that actually means. And then, you know, I mean, a significant other, which is the child's mother, is not into Japan. So, I mean, that's a trip that just doesn't make sense. Like, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I mean, if there's a place to go to that we would be more mutual, that we could mutually enjoy, that's a different story. Then, you know, that's a place that we would all go. Because, you know, going somewhere like Japan, like one parent with the kid, I'm like, nah. If the child was more of an independent age and stuff like that, that's a different story. Because you can go, I mean, Japan is safe enough to go out there, but, you know, when you're in the teens and shit, then, you know, you can go. When you are in the teens, you can go, because then you'll have a whole ass personality. And like I said, there's stuff like driving, because, you know, I gotta drive pretty much anywhere, and, you know, the right-hand drive and all that other stuff. You know, I'm a car person. I've owned a right-hand drive car in the States, and, you know, it's much harder to drive a right-hand drive car in the States than it is in Japan or a right-hand drive country, because, you know, those the way the lanes and shit are set up and the way traffic's set up is for the right-hand drive car, which means you can see everything like you're supposed to see. And, you know, if you drive right-hand drive in the States, this is actually extra difficult because you can't even see going around you. You try to pass on a two-lane street or two-lane road that has, you know, the dotted yellow lines, you are taking a chance. You got to have a really fast car to even think about trying it. So, yeah. But, you know, driving would be a thing because, you know, I'm a driving person. And even, like I said, even me being a driving person, I don't like driving on the interstates. That's it, because it's boring as fuck. And spending hours just sitting there, it's just, it's kind of draining. But driving right hands, you know, most people that go to Japan, especially Americans, are not going to get cars. And I believe that, you know, there's a subreddit called Fuck Cars. I believe most Americans feel that way. They wouldn't drive if they didn't have to, and You know, I mean, you go to Japan, you really don't have to, especially if you're staying in cities. Because, I mean, even if you go through the major cities like I did, you know, the Kyoto, Osaka, Tokyo, and all this other stuff, you know, you can spend everything, the days can be spent, you know, using metros or whatnot. And then to get between the cities, you know, Shinkansen. So, you know, you really don't need one, but I'm too much of a car person to not have one. And that's, you know, with a significant other that's just, you know, an NPC when it comes to cars and stuff. Driving is going to be too difficult, so I'd have to do all the driving and, you know, have to go to all the stuff. And, you know, like with the kid, have to go through, you know, have to go to, like, shit, like, all that stupid shit, like see Disney and probably like stuff like that. I'm like, I'm not doing that shit. That's the same shit you can do here, which, I mean, this child gets to go on a bunch of trips throughout the fucking year anyway and gets to do all that hokey pokey shit. I mean, you know, yeah, we can provide that stuff, and, you know, we do it because we can provide it, which is great, but it's like, if you get to go to Disney World and Universal Studios and the amusement park, you get to do all this stuff all the time, like, going to Japan and just doing the same stuff, but there's just not, you don't need to waste that trip. Besides, probably already been to 3 or 4 places throughout the year anyway, like 3 or 4 major places, so you'll be all right. But, you know, that is something that I would love to do when it makes sense, but just any time now doesn't make sense. And, you know, with also, aside from driving, you know, significant others, like, Japan is my thing. Japan's not their thing. So, you know, there's no reason to even go on that trip. I say something that's more, you know, I don't know, like something like the UK would be easier to do with everybody. But, you know, cars is kind of my major fucking thing. So it's like Japan first because of cars, and then Germany probably second because of cars. Now, you know, I mean, that's left-hand drive. But my thing is also, I got to learn language before I go, and I don't think anybody else is willing to do that kind of thing. Now, some places you can get away with without their language. Now, Japan was really easy because I was already in that stuff well before I went, so I'd already learned some when I was younger before I got to the point where I didn't think I was going to go, which of course I dropped off. But when I started, when I booked, I started learning again the first time back in 2019 to get back to a decent level. And it was, like I said, as I was there, it was just getting more and more natural and stuff. You know, brain farts, which, you know, I had this time as well. There's just like, for some reason you hear something and it's just like it doesn't click with you the first time you hear it, and then you might okay, I gotcha. So, you know, there's all kind of stuff. But, you know, also like learning languages when you go, you know, like 6 months, like if you have 6 months before, you know, the trip or whatever, between the booking and the trip, like, yeah, learning would be good. So, you know, if I go to Germany, I need to learn some German. I need to learn some Deutsch. Or anywhere else. Now, you know, the reason I mentioned the UK is because if you go there, nobody has to learn anything. So therefore, they're like the other folks' lack of effort isn't really gonna be a hindrance. Now, you know, you can go to Germany and everything could also be done in English as well, from what I understand. But, well, I mean, I don't know, but it could be possible where English is what everything's going to be interacted in. So, yeah. But, you know, I don't even want to take the chance because people said that about Japan. And the first day that I was in Japan on the first trip, you know, there's actually a little shift there. So the first day that I was there, I would ask people if they spoke English. Of course, I would ask it in Japanese. Before, you know, the interaction went. Because if I, you know, obviously since I hadn't spoken it with Japanese people, I was hesitant to speak. But, you know, when you do and they're understanding what you say, it's like, okay, all right, okay, this is fine. This is fine. So yeah, it's it's very late and I actually forgot where I was at. This video's kind of going, so I'm gonna cut it off here. I'll talk about the trip on the next one. I might try to edit some stuff into this one, videos and pictures of the actual trip, so we'll see. All right, that's it. Bye for now.